To a latkes.
Yes, for sure. Um, all right, so without further ado, because I want to be respectful of everyone's time, Geoffrey Klein is going to be talking about the science of story. Geoffrey, we met, I'm trying to think, was it through a networking event or just a follow-up? Do you remember?
It was through a networking event. I don't recall which one at the moment. I don't know if it was with Bryn Tillman, maybe.
Actually, it was Bryn Tillman. Bryn Tillman. Yeah, we were on, I think, a social sales link call or something like that. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of hers, so
yes, for
I'll
sure. So take it away, Jeffrey. If anyone has any questions, do you want questions at the end of the chat? Do you want me to follow along?
I'm pretty fluid about it. So if people, I interrupt people a lot because I'm worried I'll forget my question. So if they either want to write it in the chat, if you want to interrupt me, I'll go with the flow. So it's something that and the first part, I know people kind of will trickle in the next minute or so. So I'm going to start with kind of a few introductory remarks. And I always start by saying thank you. So thank you to Ken and thank you all for being here. I'm hopefully going to share some value with you today, and I'm going to be focused for the next hour on why story matters for your business and how to communicate better by telling better stories. It's kind of that simple. And a session on the science of story, we'll start with some stories. So we'll have some story time. And I thought I'd start, for those that may not know much about me, with my own story. So I was born in West Philadelphia, just like the Fresh Prince. I attended Amherst College, where I was an English and sociology major, which prepared me pretty much for not much. I moved to the Big Apple, and I went to go work. My first boss was a marketing genius named Seth Godin. Sadly, I didn't follow him when he went and sold his company to Yahoo for millions of dollars. Instead, I went to law school for a couple years. People joke I was a law school dropout because after my second year, I left and moved and went to California. I had a dream to go work in the film industry. I did finish my law school credits, so I have a law degree that I've never used. There are a few of us law students, law graduates like that. And I went and I worked in a talent and literary agency. And my first job was actually in the story department, which I love that's where I began my journey. And what that really meant was I read a lot of bad screenplays and then wrote the equivalent of like a book report on them to be considered. And of the hundreds I read, I don't know if I ever recommended one. But I also read some amazing stuff. I'm from Philly, where M. Night Shyamalan is. At the time he wrote The Sixth Sense, it sold for the most money ever, and they represented him at UTA. That was pretty cool. And then after that, I went to go work for the head of production at Paramount Pictures and worked on a whole bunch of movies. And then I had a similar job where I did that at MGM. And again, I got to see how movies got made. I was a small cog in the big machine, but it was pretty awesome. And then I fell in love with a girl and moved to Manchester, England, because that's where she was from. I worked for 10 years living there, primarily working in real estate development. And then I had my midlife crisis and I decided I had to get something back more creative. So I ended up working for a design agency in Manchester, had my three children in England. We would visit Philadelphia and eventually we came here for a year and decided to stay. That was about 6.5 years ago. So when we decided to stay, I said I should go find a job. So I went and looked at I got a job at a brand marketing agency that did brand development and kind of full service marketing. I started my own agency about 4.5 years ago called Nine Dots, where we basically do visual content.
I
I'm
got it.
also a speaker, and I added adjunct professor a couple years ago. And I'm talking quickly because I want to get to the good stuff. But I will share some people. I'm kind of that combo of right and left brain. And so I thought I'd share my kind of professional career by the numbers. So I've worked and lived in 3 continents, having studied abroad in Australia. I've worked in 4 different industries over the last 25 years. And I joke I've probably had 40 different jobs. And I decided to see what that looked like as a graphic. So I refer to this as the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I share this with people because I'm not a typical marketer. I've worked in big companies and small companies. I've started my own companies. And the through line through all of that is what my mission has been. And my mission is to tell and share awesome stories and help others tell and share awesome stories. and hopefully along the way have some fun. And I'm going to try and have some fun with you guys as well. We're going to do a little bracket game, and it revolves around this question, which is who here likes snacks? So I'm going to assume that you all like snacks of some sort, but we're actually going to find out kind of what our favorite Corona time snack is. And here's the bracket. So we're going to have 3 rounds, and we have kind of salty on the one side, and we have sweet on the other side. And we're going to go through, and I'm going to ask you to participate using the participants yes or no. And we'll start on the salty side. So that top one is chips or crisps, depending on where you live, and pretzels. So if you can put in the participant list, if you prefer chips, put a yes. If you prefer pretzels, put a no. And that way I can tally the votes. So if you go, if you know in the, I don't know if you've
Chat.
used this before. Do you not have that
It's
ability?
in the chat.
Oh, in the chat.
In the chat.
All right, so I'll have to quickly. Oh, so putting yeah. So we'll actually use the thing. So no 1, 2. I'm gonna have to count these fast. It's looking like chips is winning, although it's close. Yep, it's definitely chips, and I would have preferred pretzels, but chips is our answer. So chips wins, and then let's do the bottom one. So we have that's actually a bowl of peanuts, and then popcorn. And Sam seems to already be on top of it. So either put popcorn or nuts. So we can see which one of those two nuts, popcorn, nuts, popcorn. Oh, pretty split. Um, anyone? Ken, you want to decide which one you think won between those?
Uh,
That's
I'm gonna say I'm gonna say nuts just to break it.
all right. Nuts, not peanuts. No, I didn't say peanuts. I leave that open, but we'll say nuts is the winner there. Now let's switch over to the sweet side. So we have candy and chocolate. So are you a candy fan or a chocolate fan?
Yes.
We got chocolate, chocolate, chocolate.
I think
Oh,
it's chocolate by a landslide.
yeah, it's looking okay. And finally, ice cream or donuts. So ice cream, donuts, ice cream, ice cream. I think someone put
I think
biscuit.
it's ice cream.
I think ice cream is the winner, which is not surprising. Okay, we will come back to that in a little bit, and I'll explain kind of why we did that. But right now, I want to jump into what I call the science of story. And for that, I'm going to tell you another story. In this story, I kind of talk about why story matters. And I think we all know intuitively that there's a power in telling stories. But I'm going to tell you a story. I like to good stories start with once upon a time, and it took place in my fair city of Philadelphia back in 1918. And there was a young man who had just graduated from high school named Charles, and Charles was a math whiz, and he actually got free ride scholarships to 3 different engineering schools. But Charles couldn't go to college because his family was too poor. He couldn't afford to go for free. He had to get a job. So instead of going to college, poor Charles went to go work in a steel factory in Philadelphia. And one day his buddy Dave came, and Dave was carrying some books. And Charles said, "What are those books you got there?" And Dave said, "I'm going to law school at Temple at night." And Charles said, "Well, how much is it?" And Dave said, "It's $35 a term," which even in 1918 was a really good deal. So Charles applied to law school. He never went to undergraduate. And in 1934, he broke the record for being the youngest lawyer in Pennsylvania history to become a judge. And that record stood until his son broke it at age 32. What I tell people is I did attend law school, but I did not break either my grandfather Charles or my father Richard's record.
I muted you. Unmute. Thank you.
I'm good. I'm good. I saw you mute everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, sure.
So I could have told you all my father and grandfather were judges. That's the facts, right? But instead, I kind of told you this story. And that's because I believe that story matters. And the great part of it is that the science proves it. So I'm going to tell you what I refer to as the brain story. There was a neuroscientist at Princeton at the time named Professor Uri Hassan. And Professor Hassan was an expert in brain chemistry and communication. And he asked himself this question. He wanted to know how our brains behaved depending on what input we got. And what he found out was that communication is really all about brain chemistry. Here's the experiment that he did. He had two groups. One group was given information, and another group was given that information via a narrative, by being told a story. So the first group of people that were told the facts, the figures, the data, the wonderful information that when we ordinarily have something called death by PowerPoint, two parts of our brain activate: the Broca's area and the vernix area. Now, these are really important parts of your brain because they're responsible for you to be able to code meaning so you understand the words that are being said. However, the people that were told a story had very different brain activity. Not only did the vernix and Broca's areas activate, but their brain lit up. And not only that, but the parts of the brain that activated were those parts of the brain that the listener would use if they were experiencing the story themselves. There's this phenomenon called neural coupling, which is where the speaker's brain activity and the listener's brain activity mirror one another. So that if I tell you a story about me kicking a ball, your motor cortex activates. And that's how it's so connected. There's also a rise in two hormones, the cortisol and oxytocin. So in the chat, does anyone know what cortisol is responsible for? Cortisol hormone? It's a pretty powerful one.
Stress.
Michelle, stress. Yes, it's the stress hormone, the fight or flight. Exactly, Janine. You got. I knew this was a smart crowd, so I'm not surprised that you guys know this. What about oxytocin? Anyone understand what oxytocin's all about? It's apparently very popular with pregnant women. I think there's an increase. Happy, good feeling, exactly. Pleasure. Carlos, good job. Janine, exactly. So you have the stress hormone and you have the love hormone. Now, why does that matter in terms of effective communication? The reason it matters is because there's a lot of noise out there and we need to be able to get people's attention. And when you have a rise in cortisol, your brain is telling you to pay attention. It's saying be alert, so that when someone's telling you a story, all of a sudden your focus and attention is drawn to them. And then oxytocin is the love hormone, which is the emotional connection, which a lot of marketers like to talk about, but that's how you connect with people on an emotional level. The results of his study were pretty fascinating. He determined that when you tell people a story, as opposed to just giving them the information, there's an increase between 20 and 40% of both understanding and retention. Now, if you're trying to communicate your business to someone, whether it's a prospect or internally, and you can get people to understand what you're talking about and remember it, you're going to be ahead. So I have some action steps that I'm going to be sharing throughout the hour. And the first one's real simple: tell more stories. And so my bonus step is to keep watching so you can learn how. But before we get on to some of the how to tell better stories, it's time to move on to our next poll. So we're now doing chips versus nuts. So in the chat, if you prefer chips, put chips. And if you prefer nuts, put nuts. And I will let Ken make the call of who is the winner. Oh God, it's pretty close.
It's very close.
Then you can make the executive decision. Oh, I like how that someone put crisps.
I'm going to say nuts.
Nuts is pulling ahead.
Yeah.
Those poor crisps. Okay. And then how about on the flip side? We've got chocolate and ice cream. That's a tough one. Ice cream. Let's see. Do you prefer chocolate or ice cream? Please let me know in the chat. Chocolate, ice cream with chocolate flavor. See? Chocolate ice cream. This is another tough one. I don't know what to. So Ken, you can weigh in and have your vote counts.
Can we say 50 votes? Can we say chocolate ice cream, or is that just cheating?
No, I'm afraid we can't do that. We'll get there in a second. So where do you want to go? Yeah, that's cheating.
I mean, personally, I like chocolate over ice cream, but so let's just do that executive decision.
You can complain at the door. No one will listen. Oh, ice cream. Sorry, chocolate is
get the best of both worlds. Chocolate chip ice cream.
Yes, that's it. So okay, so we'll get back to that to see who the overall winner is. But I want to share with you that this theory about story mattering is not just an academic theory. Big brands understand the power of story. I'm going to give you a couple examples. So Nike actually has and has had for a long time a chief storytelling officer. It's been there for something like 40 years. And when you become an executive at Nike, they actually have a 2-day onboarding to teach you about corporate storytelling and the Nike story. Motorola actually has hired improv actors to come and help people learn how to tell their stories. Procter & Gamble hired Hollywood directors to train their executives about how to tell stories. Kimberly-Clark has a similar thing to Nike. And my favorite has got to be 3M. They have people who make office supplies. So a number of years ago, they banned bullet points in PowerPoint presentations. No more bullet points. And instead, they started to train people on these strategic narratives. So big brands are understanding that story is really powerful. But we're in a very unique time. And what I was curious about, why does story matter even more during the corona crisis? And I have some really disturbing news for you all, and I hope you'll be okay with this. But we're all suffering from 2 other pandemics beyond the one that we're all hearing about. And the 2 pandemics that we're all suffering from is infobesity and short attention spans. Let's start with infobesity. Infobesity is information overload. And there's a great company that every year they create a graphic called the Internet Minute. And this is what happens in 1 minute on the internet. Now it's a small graphic, so I'm gonna break out some highlights for you. In 1 minute on the internet, there's over 1 million logins to Facebook, almost 5 million videos on YouTube, almost 200 million emails, and over 4 million Google searches in 1 minute on the internet. Worse than that, they did a study at IBM that found that of all the data that's been created, 90% of all data created was created in the last couple of years. So we are accelerating the speed at which we are creating more data, and it's just overwhelming us. We are bombarded every day, all day with information. It's hard to keep track. But we have a second problem, the second pandemic. Oh, I don't have a short attention span. Oh, look, a kitten. Our attention spans have unfortunately gotten smaller and smaller. Back in 2000, they did a study, and they found that the average attention span of a human was 12 seconds. The average attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. And today, the average attention span of a human is 8 seconds. So let that just sink in. Human attention spans are shorter than that of a goldfish. So thank you all for paying attention. I know it's been more than 8 seconds. So how do we treat these 2 problems, infobesity and short attention? Well, I'm sure you can all figure out what the actually answer will be. It's going to be story. And the reason story is we've talked about from the brain perspective, but when you have this other 2 problems of information overload and short attention spans, stories grab and hold people's attention. I don't know, Lori. I'd come up with a study about the goldfish. They must do things with, there was a question about how do you measure a goldfish attention span? There's some PhDs who decided that's what they were going to focus on and found the measurements. So a story is going to, effective stories is going to be the way that you're going to be able to grab people's attention and hold their attention. Great. So now I think we can all agree story is great and we understand why it matters, but how do we do it? How do we tell better stories? So I'm going to give you what I call the ABCs of telling better stories. Keep things simple. So the A, anyone want to have a guess in the chat of what the A is? What does it stand for? What word that starts with A in terms of telling effective stories? Have a guess. You're a smart group. I'm sure someone will come up with the answer. Attention. Well, we just talked about attention. So you would think that would be action. I love that. Action and interesting. And Scott is the winner so far. And again, these are all good answers, but the one I was looking for was the audience. You got to know your audience because because I have unfortunately another news flash that may upset a few of you, but this is a Corona Commission news flash. Nobody cares about what you can do. Let me say that again. Nobody cares about what you can do. People only care about what you can do for them. And I refer to the most popular radio station, WII-FM. And some of you will know what that radio station, it stands for What's in It for Me. Again, nobody cares what you're doing. What's in it for me? So as a marketer, as a business leader, you need to always be thinking about your audience so that your story, don't care about your brand story, about your features, your benefits. You got to make the customer the hero. And you got to remember, if you remember nothing else from this webinar, remember the 11th commandment, which is know thy audience. So if you know your audience, you got to start there or you're going to be hopeless. So here's an action step. You're thinking about doing some marketing campaign, social media, internal communication. Write down everything you know about your customer or your client. Seems simple enough. A lot of people don't do it. Now, some marketers take it one step further and they create what they call a buyer persona. And it's a snapshot of kind of an ideal customer. They make up funny names, talk about their demographics, and it's a quick snapshot so you can understand who your audience is. And when you're deciding some messaging, you can say, is this going to resonate with this audience member? If anyone wants to see a template of a buyer persona, you can just email me and I will happily send it along. Ken, I'll send it to you as well, and they can ask you for it. So that is the A, know thy audience. How about B? What's the B in telling effective stories? B. Now, I know you all have brains. So anyone want to have a guess on B? B is for not ball. Body language. Be original, be authentic. So Michelle is the winner on this version. Brand, again, all these answers are good. I don't want you to think that these aren't good. But the one I was particularly looking for was be authentic. And I love that Michelle put be authentic because I want to be authentic with you. In some ways, this isn't very authentic because the B is the word, but the key word that you really want to pay attention to is authenticity. So I hope you will forgive me for kind of twisting that little square peg into the round hole to make it work. But it is how you want to be. So I think it still works. But so you want to be authentic. So one of the ways you can do this is think about why do you do what you do? Because if you ever watch, and the bonus step is to watch Simon Sinek's Start With Why TED Talk. It is phenomenal. He wrote a book called Start With Why, but you can just watch his TED Talk and get 99% of it out, in my opinion. But the idea is that people buy from brands and businesses because of why they do what they do, not what they do. And I do a whole thing on that I won't get into, but it's important to know your purpose of why you're selling whatever it is you're doing in the world. And then we have C. What could C stand for? C is for cookie. That's good enough for me. I was a big Cookie Monster fan. Anyone have a guess what C could stand for? Content, credible, customer, content, all really important. Consumer, creativity, Alex. Yes, definitely. Challenge, communication. Michelle and I must be, on the same wavelength. Because again, the one I was looking for was connect with your audience. So it's one thing to understand them, and then you have to figure out how to connect to them. And my little graphics here represent both the emotional. So we talked about the increase in oxytocin and how that connects with people, but also sensory. We talked about neural coupling and how when I, if I'm going to share my story and I do it in a way where it engages one of your senses, your brain activity will mirror that as well. So here's an action step for that. Write down how your customers feel before and after they experience your product or service. And kind of a bonus step, list the senses that can be engaged in that experience. Because my wife was just quoting this, I can't remember if it was Maya Angelou, but it's been credited to a few people, which is people may not remember what you say, they're not even gonna remember what you do, but they're always gonna remember how you made them feel. And if you can make a customer or a client feel, that's the connection that's gonna last. All right, now I have another kind of quiz question, which is, who was, in my humble opinion, the godfather of narrative? Who was the godfather? Any guesses you want to put in the chat? Who was the godfather of narrative? and it's not Mario Puzo, and it's not Francis Ford Coppola, the director. Ogilvy, Walter Cronkite. I like all these. So we got to go back a little further to get the answer I'm looking for. He's the Godfather, Al Pacino. I like that answer, and Moses, Shakespeare, God, all great answers. Shakespeare's one that I often get from people. Oh, I love Dale Carnegie Brook. Oh, Mr. Rogers, I love Mr. Rogers. No, for my opinion, and by many, kind of the Godfather was Aristotle. Back in 350 BC, he kind of set up the structure for, the 3-act structure that we use for movies and novels and basic story structure. But I'll bet you didn't know this about good old Aristotle. Little known fact that Aristotle was in fact a Jeopardy champion. And on the episode of Jeopardy that he won, the final Jeopardy category was story characters. And here's the answer. This character needs to be in every story. So what's the question? Which is the answer? You know how Jeopardy works. So what character needs to be in every story? The hero, the reader. Who is the reader? Oh, I like that, Mark. You actually put it in the form of a question. The audience, the bad guy. These are all great characters, but it's not the one I'm looking for. Who is the customer? These are all very good answers. But for mine, it's this guy. Who is Big Man Ed? Right? We all know Big Man Ed. Big Man Ed. You don't know Big Man Ed? So Big Man Ed, and that's a trick question. I apologize. I'm trying to have a little fun here. Big Man Ed is an acronym for how to structure your story. Big Man Ed. Beginning, middle, and end. So when you're thinking about crafting your story, make sure that Big Man Ed is there because he needs to be the beginning, middle, and end. Okay, so again, the action step is to use the 3-act structure. When you're crafting any kind of communication, we like as human beings to go through the beginning, the middle, and the end of a story, whatever kind of story it is, not just fiction, but all kinds of stories in the way we communicate. So you're like, okay, great, Big Man Ed. But Big Man Ed is a simple guy. So we thought it was important to give him a simple tool to know what to do in the beginning, middle, and end. Because Big Man Ed, he may know the beginning, middle, and end, but okay, I need to tell beginning, well, but what should be the beginning? And what should be the middle? And how should I end it? So I developed a tool, a very simple tool that I call the story pad. So the PAD represents the beginning, the middle, and the end. So the P in pad stands for the problem. Again, we start with the audience. What is the problem or pain of your audience? And you start the story there. And you've seen this on lots of commercials. Are you suffering from fill in the blank? They're starting with the pain so that someone will go, wait a minute, that's me. I have that problem. Let me pay attention. And then the middle of the story is the answer or the solution that your product or service provides. So they have a problem, and guess what? We can help you. And finally, the D, which a lot of people forget, is the difference. This is the impact it makes on the person's life or on the person's business. So you've got a problem, an answer, and the difference it makes, the story pad. Let me give you a couple examples. I think it will help just flesh this out. So one of the things that's been a challenge during this pandemic has been food. So what could be a problem related to food? So, and how could you use the story pad? So let's imagine that you're a restaurant and you're trying to communicate to people to come and dine with you. So the problem is, I'm hungry. That's your customer's problem. There are no good places to eat. Guess what? There is. Just come to our new restaurant and guess what? We deliver. So now you have the answer. We got great food. And what's the difference it's going to make? The D, you're going to have a great dining experience. So there you go. You got, I'm hungry you're starting with your audience right away. Hey, are you hungry? You want some good food? We got some good food. We even deliver. And the result is, and when you have our food, you're going to be satisfied and happy and tell a friend. So that's example one. Now, I did go to law school, so I thought I should use a legal example. And these actual group of specifically, I'm going to talk about personal injury lawyers. So personal injury lawyers, again, and I've seen billboards that say this, and I'm sure you've seen it as well. What's the problem? Have you been injured in an accident? That's the problem. And we scorn at all those ads as being kind of corny or cheap, but they're following the story pad. They're focused on the audience right away. So you've been injured in an accident. Yeah, I just yesterday, guy fender bendered me. Oh, look, someone can help me. Yes, we can help you. Our legal expertise will help you get to what you need to go. And what is the difference it'll make to you? Money. You'll be appropriately compensated for your suffering. So again, you've got the problem, the answer, and the difference it makes, the story pad. A simple but effective way to make sure that your story has not only beginning, middle, and end, but has a very specific way to tell your story of your business. So again, action plan, write your story using the story pad. And then bonus step, try and do it with one of your competitors. See how they compare, because you're going to have to find a way to differentiate yourself. Okay, so let's do a little recap. ABCs of telling more effective stories. I forgot the G's. We have know your audience. 11th commandment, know thy audience. Be authentic, because people's radar for BS is higher than ever. And if you're inauthentic, you're going to do a lot of damage. Don't try and be anything other than what you are. And finally, connect with your audience on that emotional level, sensory level. It's a way that our brains work. Just get into it. Okay, so you guys are a good group. So I've given you this, top level kind of tips, but you're a good group. So I've decided to give you a bonus letter. The bonus letter is V. Now, when I do this with groups in Philadelphia, I get into a little trouble. I teach at Temple University, and this is actually the Villanova V, where I live. But it stands for something else in terms of telling effective stories. Anyone have an idea what V could be for? V in telling effective story. Victory. I love that you said that, Alexander. Victory. V for victory. Everyone, it's a very common answer, and you want to have victory for sure when you're telling your stories. I'm not sure what the whole pickle situation's about. Sorry, I can't read all those things. Vision, value added. I love value. Is Robert's name really the value? That's awesome. Viva Las Vegas. All good answers. I love Vegas as well. But the answer I'm looking for, and if you knew anything about me, Veritas. Michelle, very good. That's too fancy. V stands for visual. Visual is the way, it's that very extra way you can connect with people and do all those things that I said, but in a visual way. So I'm going to tell you one last story. It's about a socialite back in the 1950s, early 60s named Coco Storvis, who lived, I think she lived in Soho or Manhattan. I know she had a gallery. Has anyone heard the Coco Storvis? She was kind of a cult underground hero. So I'm going to tell you about her because her story is phenomenal. So Coco Storvis, again, was a socialite, and her kind of cult label was that she was the most connected person in the world. And she knew world leaders, she knew business people, she knew artists, everyone in between. She knew everybody. And the reason she was connected to all these people was because she was, in fact, amazing at communicating. She was a master communicator. And the reason she was so good at communicating was because, guess what? She could tell a really good story. And so people were drawn to her because of her ability to tell these stories. And she had this gallery, and these parties were like sought after, and people would, fight tooth and nail to get tickets to go into her gallery because she was doing things back then that were kind of, revolutionary, innovative with mixed media. So she had video playing, and she was an artist, and so she had all this kind of mixed media stuff going on, and that was part of the way that she told her story. And as a result, she became known as the most connected person in the world. Now, what I find most fascinating about Coco's story is that, in fact, it is a complete fabrication of my imagination. I made Coco up. But there's a reason I did, and I'm going to share it with you now. Coco is a representation of my worldview when it comes to communication. And it relates to what I call the rings of communication. So if we start at the outer one, what is our goal as humans? It's to connect with people. That's what we're all here for. And what's the best way to connect with people? By having effective communication. And what's the best way to communicate? Well, I hope by now you've learned it's through story. And the best way to tell a story is through visual. So if you take those rings and we take the beginnings of all of them, you will see that we come up with Coco Stories. And that's how I came up with Coco Stories. So when you're thinking about, wait, what's this thing about story? Just remember Coco. That's what I always tell people. But why do we need Coco? Why does visual matter so much? Well, I'm afraid there's a problem we have. On top of everything else, people really aren't reading all that much. But our brains, getting back to the brain processes visual content 60,000 times faster than text. You can get things, the meaning of things, super fast. And do we all want to be memorable? You know, we talked about stories. You know, one of the benefits of telling a story versus information is that it will be memorable. But think about it. When people hear things or they, you know, they read something, after 3 days, about 10% remember what they read. 20% remember what they hear. 35% remember what they see. So visual is great. But when you actually combine seeing and hearing after 3 days, up to 65% of people remember. That's why I love video. That's why I do video and animation, because it's the most powerful way to connect and get your audience to remember what you're all about. So we all know the old adage, a photo's worth 1,000 words. So anyone have a guess what a video's worth? Yes, Dara, we all need Coco. A video, anyone want to have a guess? 10,000, Michelle. You're close. 1 million. All right, Dara's getting closer. It's in fact, now Gartner Research calculated this. There's a research company calculated that a video is worth 1.8 million words. So when you're thinking about content, I love the written word. We start with scripts when we do all of our animations. But if you're really looking to connect with your audience, a video animation is going to be way more powerful. And there are tons of studies that back that up. So the last action step is create visual content. Or if you can even create a series of visual content to tell your story. Now I know you're all waiting with bated breath to find out which Corona snack is our favorite. So finally we have salty versus savory. Is it nuts or is it chocolate? And I know you'll say chocolate nuts, but that's not allowed. So please vote in the chat, chocolate or nuts, which is the winner? Judy thinks chocolate, Danielle thinks nuts, nuts, chocolate, 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 nuts, chocolate, chocolate. I think chocolate is the winner, I'm afraid, everyone.
Yes.
Nothing like chocolate. But I think the thing is, what you should go out and do is clearly you need to go buy some chocolate covered nuts and everyone will be happy. Right. Anyone have an idea why I did these polls throughout this presentation? I mean, I know it's entertaining. That's part of it. It's fun. Interaction, engagement, attention's been excellent. So I guess it did some of those things. But it also has a further meaning to reinforce what I've been saying all along. Connect with your audience. So when you're thinking about your communication and your message, remember, know thy audience. So that when you're thinking about your audience, if they love popcorn and you give them ice cream, there's going to be a disconnect. If instead they like pretzels and you give them pretzels, they're going to be delighted. So remember, tell your story, connect with your audience, and when you can, be. Thank you very much. There's all my information. And if we have time for questions.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. This is very, very helpful.
That's my hope.
So, anyone want to pose a question or take a chance to unmute yourself? We can give it a shot. We don't
promise
bite.
I won't bite. Let me say one last thing while people are thinking about the first question that someone's going to ask. Oh, someone did ask questions.
Yeah, when you don't.
Michelle, when you don't, how do you probe it? Well, what I would say is there's this new invention called Google, and you can find out a lot about someone. Now, if you're just meeting them on the street, yeah, maybe you'd have. And I think the answer is really simple, which is be curious. So, in anything, one of the things about stories is that you want to be curious about things. And so, there was a study done with networking. When we had in-person networking years ago, they did a study, and there was two people who met at a networking event, person A and person B. And person B was asking person A lots of questions. And when person A left, they were stopped and said, "Hey, what did you think of person B?" And they said, "Oh my God, that person was so interesting." And yet they didn't know anything about them. And the lesson from that is that when you're networking in any format, it's much more important to be interested than trying to be interesting. And by being interested, people will think you're interesting. Yes, Dale Carnegie is a master at that, about genuine curiosity. And so I think, again, getting to know people, it doesn't just happen, but in terms of marketing, I talk about marketing, and usually you have some sense of who your audience is and what they're. And again, I think it is, if you think about what your product or service does, what problem is it solving, and who are the people that have that problem? What do you know about them? What can you find out about them? And I was just going to try and bring this back to LinkedIn. I know this is a LinkedIn meetup, and LinkedIn is no different, I think, than anything else. Yes, Lori, curiosity and great questions, conversation gold. I agree. But on LinkedIn, it's no different. So one of the things I liked, and I think Ken did these polls that they have, you're actually asking questions of people. And that's not only engaging, but you're interested in my answer and what I have to say. So when you ask a question, these polls are fantastic because they're not only engaging someone, saying that you care about what they care about. So now you're focused on the audience. You're also getting information about your audience. So if you're trying to decide which logo someone likes, it's kind of a sense of beta testing. And by asking these questions, you are gathering information about any group of people. So it's fantastic. And I think LinkedIn, again, is still, we're just, the tip of the iceberg in terms of how to use it as effectively as we can. And I'm sure Ken talks a lot about the power of LinkedIn. And I think there's still a huge area to mine in terms of telling your story on LinkedIn, while also engaging the people in it, finding out what their story is.
I think it's great also on LinkedIn when people have things on their profile in the about section that talk a little bit about themselves. That's a great way for an introduction. If you find something in common, something beyond stuff you could do by Googling them. It's a little bit of insight into their personality.
I love it. And I think it's a two-way street. I think, again, when people come to your profile, you want them to be interested in what you're talking about. So you don't want to just give the kind of boring, I am a motivated, blah, 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 blah. You want to give them something and I'm sure Ken, will talk a lot about this.
But I think the analogy also is how you and I met, Jeff. We met because we knew someone in common. Bryn Tillman, who I've known for a while, and you have too. We were on a call, and I suggested we should have a follow-up conversation. And we did. And we didn't know exactly where it was going to go. But if you take that mindset, every time you do something, it wasn't about anything more than just learning about each other. And that's just a great thing to think about. Very few people follow up.
Follow-up is the opportunity. Exactly. Not people. I email people who said, "Oh, I want to get in touch," and then I never hear back from them. And I'm like, but I'll tell you what I like about the lack of follow-up, which is that when you follow up, you actually stand out because not everyone does it. And so when you actually are showing that genuine interest in someone, that's how you nurture relationships. And again, as Ken said, we both had that similar mindset. We had this common interest, and I'm thankful that it led us to here.
Yeah,
Geoffrey, if I may make
Go
a
ahead,
comment.
Alex.
First of all, I tremendously enjoyed your presentation for many, many reasons. Perhaps one of them is that it so much relates to what I do every day. And I happen to help people with practicing, improving their interviewing skills. And you mentioned earlier, and you showed a few slides about the human brain. And you, if I recall, you mentioned something that somebody from Princeton came up with that. Am I right?
Yes, or Hassan. He's not at Princeton anymore, but that when he did the research.
Well, I live in Princeton, and 10 years ago, I availed myself to 2 courses taught by a Princeton professor. The first course was about the human brain, and the second course was about sleep. And what I remember about the human brain is this. This is what the professor said. The human brain is not good remembering letter, words, number, text, paragraph. We don't. We are very good remembering images. We convert information to images. In fact, I take this and I mention this to every single client of mine, and here is how I do it. Can you please tell me verbatim 2 sentences, only 2 sentences of a conversation you had with a human 2 days ago? Can you do that? So far, no client of mine said, yes, I can. Everybody said, I can. Okay, fine, thank you. Let's try another example. By the way, have you seen a James Bond movie? 100% of my clients said yes. May I assume that you saw that movie 5, 10 years ago? Oh yeah, a long time ago. So I said, do you remember he was flying in a helicopter? He was flying low. He opened the door, he jumped into a red car, and I will not forget that blonde, cute lady next to him. And they sped off. In 2 minutes later, they were on the lake. They were chased by a helicopter. And then I said, you see, you and I can have a 5-minute wonderful dialogue about James Bond, something that happened 10 years ago. Yet when I said, can you tell me 2 sentences verbatim what you spoke to another human, you said you can't. That's exactly what this professor was teaching, that we convert information into images. And when we interview, it's not what we say, but the image that we create through our stories is what's going to be the differentiator, and decisions are made on the images that we create and not how you answer question number 4 and how does it compare to the other candidate, question number 7. Make sense?
Couldn't agree more. Spot on. It's about that visual image, and I think that to me, that's why the combination between story and visual story, that's what I do for a living. I tell visual stories, and for me, they are the most effective way to communicate. So I agree 100%.
Thank you.
Will you be sharing the presentation with us so that we can look at it later?
Yeah, you just need to send me a check for. No, I'm just kidding. I will share the a PDF with you.
That's great. That's great. Linda, you want to talk? Linda, are you on the call still?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, why don't you chime in?
Yeah.
You and I, we're all veterans here. Of these.
Right. And thank you for that. Listening to Alex and Geoffrey as well, I have for years heard about storytelling. And what I want to say is that to me, I often find individuals, in this case, I'll put it in the context of interviewing, often have a difficult time translating their thoughts into storytelling. And for whatever reason, I think that when they're interviewing, it's not a natural progression of how to tell the story. And I think if people practice that a little more, they would get it and be able to do it fluently. And, you know, we're always advocating PARS, CARS, whatever, STARS, whatever you want to call the acronym. But this ability to take your past experience and turn it into a story. When I was interviewing for AT&T, I am telling you that the best predictor of past behavior, the best predictor of future behavior was past behavior. And I help individuals today learn how to take their own experience and translate it into a story. That is really the crux of what makes a person memorable. So, I hope that helps, but I just think it's not always an easy turn for people. And if you can accept that part and kind of muddle through it, practice, you'll get a lot better at it. And according to Jeff and me and everyone else on the call, be a lot more interesting. And,
Yeah,
and
I'll
you
just
know
say,
what? I'm sorry, but I just want to make a comment about that. Be interesting and interested. I've often heard that put in the context of elderly people, and for individuals, that is such a nugget of just a golden nugget. Be interested and interesting, and you will by far stand out.
So is there a good example of a story someone asked about in an interview, telling a story? I mean, is there like a general thing that you could suggest?
yeah, well, I think again, one of the things that Linda said, and I think is not just one is to practice. So there aren't an infinite number of questions that most interviewers ask. And so I think it's a good idea before you go and interview to kind of think about what the kinds of general questions are going to be, and then think of a connecting story for that answer. So when they say to me, what's your greatest strength? You don't just want to say my greatest strength is resilience. You need to tell a story about an opportunity when you were resilient. So it's about taking that piece of information and finding a story as an illustrative example. So I think it's again, and I think again, what you have to think about your audience. What are they looking for out of a candidate? So if they're looking for someone, that they're going to be, if you know the kind of job that you're applying for, what are the skill sets? They usually have them in their job description. So we're looking for someone who's detail oriented. We're looking for so now you want to think about, okay, how can I share a story? And maybe it's not, they don't ask you this question, but in a conversation, you're able to weave in the story about how you are detail oriented, because just saying you're detail oriented is not very compelling. But if you explain, well, and it doesn't have to be, it could be a personal story. And I think that's one of the things we forget. You don't need to say, oh my God, I was organizing this spreadsheet for my job and blah, blah, blah. It could be something as, I'm obsessed with basketball. And so I organize the details of all the statistics, or I'm into fashion, or whatever the interest is. I think people like to see you have a personality beyond a specific thing that you might be asking about. And again, connecting with people, because when you share something personal, it's possible they have a connection to that or to something, which is why I think hobbies and other activities are important when you're communicating with people, telling those stories. But I think it's again about preparation and practice.
LinkedIn actually has a place where they have the interview questions and some suggested answers too. So that's always
lots of
yeah.
Let me interject. One time when I was interviewing a recent college graduate, and it was a real live interview. And I asked him, tell me about a time you took a leadership role. And he said, I don't really think I have an example. And I said, it could be something personal. And he said to me, well, I'm head of the choir at my church. I want to tell you his story about how he took charge of the choir and what he did was one of the most memorable stories. And he never even intended to tell that story. So personal as well as academic, or as well as your experience, is memorable when you put it in that story format, Jeff. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else I can?
If no one else has any other questions.
We'll all go to snack, probably chocolate.
Okay. I'm going to bring chocolate next week. I'm going to bring peanuts. I wish I could give them to everyone here, but I can't. But thanks everyone for coming. Thank you so much, Geoffrey. This was so great.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all very much. And again, I have my information there. Feel free to reach out on me on LinkedIn if I'm happy to speak with anyone and try and be helpful in whatever way. officially or unofficially. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely great. Thanks again. So I'm going to save the chat. You guys know what I do. Save the chat, the video, and we'll connect later on. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jeff,
Bye,
Jeff,
everyone.
one more comment, Jeff.
Thank you.
Children love stories.